everybody, welcome. It's Friday again, our favourite time of the week, and thank you so much for joining me today on Friday's Live. So if you're here and watching, say hello in the comments. My name's Rose. It's going to be a good session today. We've got lots to get through, so let us know where you're watching from. I'm in sunny Southwark today, it's just south of the river. And it's gorgeous. It's a gorgeous day. I'm wearing my daisies because spring is in the air. Finally, after a very long winter here in London, finally we're getting some lovely spring weather. So hello there to Andrea, Janet from North Wales. Hi Paul, Andrew, Georgia. Lovely to have you joining us today to finish off the week. So we've got a packed agenda today, and we're going to start by talking about some of our new records of the week. We have the lovely Jessie in the comments, so please do say hello to Jessie. Lovely Jessie is with us today. And just a quick reminder of our question of the week, which is, if you could go back in time, when and where would you travel to and why? So we'll come back to this in a little while, but first we're going to talk about some of our new record sets of the week. So we've got more joining. Just hello there to Daphne, to Sue, to Janet, to Karen. Hello to you all. Thank you so much for joining me today. So as I said, we've got a packed agenda today, and we've got 3 new record sets to introduce to you this week, as well as 22 new newspapers. And if you joined me last month, you will know that I love my newspapers, so excited to be talking about those later. Okay, so we've got military nurses this week, Indian Navy records of service, and Middlesex monumental inscriptions. So let's get started. Military nurses. This is another wonderful set that we've added this week to really celebrate the pioneering women from history. Now, these records this week are mainly from the First World War, and we've added over 15,000 of them. And they cover the Queen Alexandra's Imperial Military Nursing Service and the reserve part of that service. Now, this service was formed in 1902, just after the end of the Boer War. This was when the need for nurses in the military was really felt very apparent. So it was established by royal warrant in March 1902, and it's known as the QAIMNS for short. It's quite a mouthy acronym there, so I'll try and remember that one. And these records are also taken from the Territorial Force Nursing Service, and this nursing service was established during the First World War to staff nursing to staff hospitals at home. There were 25 of these auxiliary hospitals in the United Kingdom. And eventually, the Territorial Force Nursing Service, members from the service did actually go abroad in the end to help with their QAIMNS colleagues during the First World War. So they went to military hospitals and casualty clearing stations in France, Belgium, Gibraltar, Malta, and Egypt. So these are some really incredibly brave and pioneering women, and they are pictured here in one of our newspapers, The Sphere, in 1917. Now, these are some members of the QAIMNS. I'm getting used to saying that one now. And they were receiving medals from King George V for bravery and devotion to duty while nursing the wounded. So what can the records from these sets tell you? So I searched the name Staveley, the surname Staveley. It's my surname. I always like to search one's own surname. I know I didn't have any nursing ancestors, but it's always nice to check just in case. You never know. And here is the record for Muriel Staveley. And I found out that this Muriel Staveley, she was a member of the QAIMNS. So it tells you what nursing service the particular person was a member of. So this is a really, really great set to see the names of these 15,000 pioneering women on Findmypast this week. So our next record set of the week is the Indian Navy Records of Service 1840 to 1947. Now, the Indian Navy has its roots back all the way to 1612 with the East India Company. And up until 1863, the government of India had its own competent navy, the Indian Navy, which was based in Bombay, which is now Mumbai. And they worked with the Royal Navy to patrol Indian waters and also to conduct marine surveys. In 1863, the force was divided into two non-combatant branches, the Bombay and the Bengal Marines. They were combined again in 1877 to become the HM Indian Marine with Eastern and Western divisions. Again, another name change. They like their name changes clearly. They were changed to the Royal Indian Marine in 1892. You see the photo on the left-hand side that I've picked out from one of our newspapers. This is this time from the sketch. This shows officers from the Royal Indian Marine there in 1895. And true to form, name again was changed in 1934 to the Royal Indian Navy. Now, the Indian Navy, the Royal Indian Marine and the Royal Indian Navy did see some action during the two world wars. During the First World War, the Royal Indian Marine helped to patrol off the coast of Bombay when there were mines found in that area, and they also delivered supplies from India to Iraq, Egypt, East Africa. And just before the Second World War, the Indian Navy only had 8 warships, but by 1943 it expanded to have 20,000 men, and that's up until 1947. So what can you find in these records? So I've pulled up the record here of Charles John Pugh Carey, and you can see that he was a lieutenant. So you get to see the rating, so what rank they were in the Navy, and you get to see their year of service. So Charles here was starting in 1887, finishing in 1907, and this is a collection from the British Library. So it's great to see some of you joining in the chat. If you're here, do say hello. It's great to see you all again today. And we'll go on to our next record set, which is the Middlesex monumental inscriptions. So we've added 7 new parishes this week to the Middlesex monumental inscriptions collection. And these records are from the likes of Ealing and Fulham, Isleworth, Littleton, Sunbury and Teddington. So this is very much the area that my mum was from. So she'll be delighted to hear about this collection where she grew up. And they span the years 1349 to 2021. So I'm sure you'll appreciate that's quite rare for us in genealogy to have the very recent as well as 1349, which is such a long time ago. And of course, I was personally fascinated by that 1349 date. What record was that? So that's the first thing I did when I was looking at records from this collection. And it brought up the record, the monumental inscription for Thomas Bradwardine in Ealing St Mary, and it was commemorating his death in 1349. And the inscription is really helpful. It tells us who he was. He was a theologian, a mathematician, who was also mentioned in the Canterbury Tales. And I really, really fangirled here. I studied English literature at university, and one of my favourites was studying Chaucer. So I was very excited to hear this. And I'm also fortunate enough to live just opposite where Chaucer's pilgrims left for their pilgrimage to Canterbury. So a very historic area of Southwark. So I was delighted to find this connection. And the most remarkable thing about Thomas Bradwardine was that he was Archbishop of Canterbury, but only for a week. And he was killed in the Black Death of 1349. So an absolutely fascinating record. The monument is not contemporary. It was raised to him in 1987 to commemorate 650 years of his incumbency, but nevertheless, still a fascinating record to find in this collection. And as part of our Middlesex monumental inscriptions, do always follow the links on the transcript pages. They can bring you some great information. So not only do you have complete church histories, you've got the picture of the church here. This is St Mary's in Ealing, so great if you, for example, you can't travel down, gives you a sense of where the monumental inscriptions are. And Paul, he has a Chaucer on his tree, and he's a descendant of the De La Pole family. Wow, that's a good one. I wonder if it's any relation to Geoffrey himself. Thanks for that, Paul. And you also get maps of the churchyards as well. I mean, I love a map in any form. I grew up in a rectory too, so I live right next to the churchyard. So I'm spent a lot of time amongst graves. That sounds strange, but probably not for my fellow genealogists. Okay, so we're now going to move on to our 22 new newspapers of the week. I won't cover all 22, don't worry, but just to give you a sense of them, our new newspapers this week come from England, Wales and Scotland. And we have a fascinating little title called McFunn's Australian News, which was published in Glasgow in 1853, and it was set up to detail the commercial progress in Australia. Now, this was an important time in Australia. The gold rush had begun in 1851. So this newspaper was really set up in reaction to that, tracing and chronicling the progress of the gold rush and those who went over to Australia to find gold. And so you will find also advice in this newspaper for emigrants to Australia. So it's a really useful title if you have anyone in your family who emigrated to Australia at this time. It's quite likely that you might have, because the population of Australia more than doubled after 1851. Population was about 400,000 then, and 20 years later we were looking at a population of about 1.4 million in Australia. We have some Scottish titles this week too. We have the Dumfries and Galloway Courier and Herald, which traces its origins all the way back to 1809. We have the Grant Town Supplement as well, from the Highland town of Grant Town. And also from Wales, we've got the Radnorshire Standard, and an array of titles from English counties. We've got the Kent Times, the Somerset Clevedon Mercury, London titles for Woodford, Wembley and Ruislip. And just to flag, we are always updating our existing titles too. So though we've added 22 new newspaper titles, we have updated 147 of our existing titles. So if you have a particular favourite newspaper out there, we are always adding new years to our existing titles. So that's always worth checking. And you can find details of that every week on our wonderful blog. And what Paul's confirming here, it is the Geoffrey Chaucer. His granddaughter Alice married William Jackanapes de la Pole, as he was first Earl of Suffolk. Oh, some wonderful, wonderful family history there, Paul. Thank you for sharing that with us. Okay, so question of the week. Oh, I think my slides are messed up a little bit. So let's just refresh on the question of the week. If you could go back in time, when and where would you travel to and why? So I can see we've had some answers coming through here. And although I came up with this question, I haven't thought so far where I'd like to go. So I'm going to have a think while I consider your answers. So we've got Karen here. Karen, today she broke through one of her biggest brick walls with the help of another genealogist. She would love to travel back to Zaandam in the Netherlands in around 1861 to see what it was like around the time of my husband's great-grandfather's birth. Now I know where our surname came from. Oh, that's amazing. I did research into my partner's tree and actually found out that he had some a Dutch family too, by way of Sligo. So that was an interesting one. Sally. Sally would travel back to Sandstone in Australia. It was a mining town, and the place my family, Tree Brickwall, Douglas Guy, went to. I'd be there in 1987 and stay a while to see what would exactly happen to him and being invisible. I love that idea of sort of watching your ancestor go about their daily life unobserved, especially when you've got that element of mystery. Yes, to break down those brick walls, I think that's an excellent idea there, Sally. I really like that. Who else have we got? We've got Janet here. Should we go back to Bushy in Hertfordshire in the 1880s to ask my great-great-grandmother Sarah the parentage of her 5 illegitimate children. She must have been a character. She must have been, and I find that too. I've got a great grandmother I'd loved, and she had an illegitimate child, my great-great-grandfather, and I'm fascinated to know who the father was. No ideas. She was quite humble, a framework knitter. So I love this idea of going back in time to sort of challenge our families about the secrets that we can't quite unravel from where we are now. And also Janet would like to go to Lavenham and Suffolk to get to know her Turner and Roger ancestors. And we've got Jane here. Jane that would like to go back to Aberdare, North Wales, so her paternal grandmother wouldn't be alone when she died. That's a really, really heartbreaking one there, Jane, but really lovely at the same time. So thank you for sharing that with us. And we've got Andrew here, and he'd like to go to 1858. He knows why his great-great-great-great-grandfather went to India. He was in the army, but he wants to know why his wife and 2 children went while the mutiny was in progress. That's a really interesting question, and actually something that I've been looking into this week. We've got new newspaper pages joining us from the Civil Military Gazette from that time in 1857, 1858, and this particular newspaper was produced in a town that was besieged at the time, so it actually had to stop printing. So a really fascinating point of history there, Andrew. And we've got Ellen. Ellen would like to go back to 1620. I think this is our oldest one to go back to ask her Billington ancestors why they chose to go to the colonies with pilgrim separatists who called them strangers instead of staying to England. Yeah, I mean, to have ancestors that were so daring, so pioneering all those years ago to begin a new life abroad with so much risk, so much uncertainty. I would be fascinated to know that too. Absolutely. And we've got Sue. I'd like to go back to Dublin to find my relatives on the Easter Uprising and the War of Independence. Absolutely, and find out how they were involved. I mean, again, another really fascinating period of history. Absolutely fascinating. So we've got Anya here. She's asking, do we get vaccines before time travelling? Sneaking back in time to save some records from various time periods, including the Library of Alexandria. So yeah, I think this is our oldest wish for time travel so far. And I'm going to say yes, you get vaccines. And maybe you can bring a few luxuries with you. I'm thinking toilet paper. I'm thinking chocolate. I'm thinking paracetamol. Maybe. What would you bring back with? What would your necessities be if you were going back in time? So yes, absolutely, saving those wonderful historical documents before the fire. There, that's a great idea. And we've got Georgia here. We're going another trip to Ireland to early 1800s to ask the great-great-grandfather where he was born and who his parents were. And I'm sure a lot of us with Irish ancestry would echo that sentiment. I know, I have a great-great-great-great-grandfather born in Wexford in 1796. It'd be lovely to know who his parents were. So yeah, I'm sure a lot of us would join you on that trip, Georgia. I'm not sure which particular part of Ireland, but I'm coming with you if that's okay. Oh wow, Janet. I love this one. 1770, to ask why my 5 times great grandparents named their son Pythagoras. that is probably one of the most unusual names that I've come across. And I've got, you come across quite religious ones during this time period, especially sort of the Baptist families. But Pythagoras, maybe they were interested in maths. I think that, yeah, maybe. Have got any more? Oh, yes. We've got Philip here, going back to 18th century Lancashire. So you could ask his 4 times great-grandfather, George Houghton, who his parents and grandparents were. So many, Houghton or Houghton, with the first name names, I don't know who's really who. And that is really tricky, especially I sort of find in this period of research in the 1700s, if you are in a particular place, lots of people will have the same names, even say if the name isn't particularly common, but because the family is from there, you get lots of different branches, and they're probably cousins, they're probably related in some way, but it's really hard to sort of pick out who is exactly who. So I appreciate this one. And this one from Sally, she's going back to 1949, again, invisible. I like this, Sally. I like this idea to find out precisely what happened to my mum as a baby, why she was adopted, did she have siblings, were they adopted too, and finally what happened to the grandmother after my mother's birth. Yeah, yes, absolutely. That would be fascinating. It's so tricky at that time to track down adopted relatives and to find out why that happened. So thank you for sharing that, Sally. And we've got more. We've got Karen. Some great stories here, everybody. So thanks so much for sharing them with me today. And Karen, she's going to go back to 1898 when her granddad was born, intrigued by his mum. She admitted herself to the workhouse the day before she gave birth to my granddad. I never knew my granddad, and there's no named father on his birth certificate. So like me, she was a single mother. I'd like to know more about her. I feel very connected to her and admire how strong she would have had to be. So strong. Thank you for sharing that with us, Karen. And one more, here's Debbie. Thank you for sharing over on YouTube. Hi, Debbie. She'd like to go to Ohio to find out who her 4 times great-grandfather's parents were. He was born in New York in 1806. Oh, fantastic. And we've got Gillian here too. She'd like to go back to the 1890s and meet her Irish great-grandfather. So we've got another Irish one here, Henry Findlay, and ask him firsthand about his family. So I've had some time to consider while I've been reading through all your wonderful ideas. So a lot about breaking those brick walls down, and just absolutely some fascinating ideas. For me, ever since I moved to London, I felt such a strong connection with my London ancestors. So I've got a few who are native Londoners who were here in the 1700s, living in Shoreditch, and also in Southwark. And throughout the 19th century, a lot of my ancestors came into London from Kent, from Gloucestershire to work. And I would just be really fascinated to go back and even though I've walked those same streets today, I would like to walk those same streets back then, just to know the kind of life that they lived, the sights that they saw, the smells that they smelt, just to get that sense of, the challenges that they face. I mean, I had a great grandfather who was living in Shoreditch in the 1860s, or Whitechapel, and it wasn't the nicest of places, just to put that mildly. Reading in the newspapers about the overcrowding, the sanitary conditions. Just to know that my great-great-grandfather managed to survive that, and here I am today, I would just be, that would be fascinated to go back to that particular time. For me, that's always just been calling at me. So my time machine, if it's out there, that's where I'm going to go first. And then I don't know where else. Well, we might have to revisit this. I feel we might have to. Okay, so on on this similar theme of place and time, indeed, um, Linda, I think it would be a sensory overload in the smells department. I think you're right. Probably don't want to smell 1860s London. So if we could go back in time, oh no, sorry, I've started reading my question again. So we're going to have a look at finding your place in our newspapers. So last time I joined you, we looked at researching ancestors and the names of your ancestors in newspapers. But today we're going to be really investigating that idea of place in the newspapers. So what exactly does place mean? It could be as big as a country or a continent even, down to county, city, town, village, hamlet level. And you can filter by place on our newspaper collection. So this enables you to look at the town or the city where a newspaper was published. I've just pulled out some examples here. Place, I thought let's go to the letter P. So from Pontefract to Plymouth, from Penarth to Perth. You can see the array of different towns that we have for this particular letter. And what our newspapers enable us to do is that we can look at news from a country level, from a county level, from a town level. But once you can narrow your search to those particular levels of county, town, country, you can then be even more granular with your search terms. And we're going to have a look at that. We're going to have a look at how to discover the history of your street, your house, and perhaps even your flat using our newspapers. Get down to that level. So first thing really to say is that we have a fantastic array of regional newspapers. We have all the counties from England and Ireland, as well as extensive coverage of Wales and Scotland as well. And we're always adding new titles. That is one thing to say. Every week, our newspaper collection is being updated. And we have international titles too. These are also growing as well. So we've got international titles at the moment from the likes of the Caribbean, from Canada, India, Pakistan, New Zealand, and Australia, and look out for more additions to that particular collection. So let's go to a place, let's find a place, let's pick a place. And to do that, sometimes it's useful to filter by county. And I selected Devon here. I have no Devon ancestors, but I always used to spend holidays down in Devon every year growing up. So it's a place I've got a particular fondness for. So you can see you can filter the newspapers in the collection by county, which I've done here. And I pulled out the wonderful Ilfracombe Chronicle, and this is one of our new newspapers of the week. And this was founded in the North Devon seaside town of Ilfracombe in 1860. And as a report from the Times said, that this newspaper contains the general news of the week, a list of resident gentry and visitors of Ilfracombe and neighbourhood. So what kind of things can we learn about our place from our newspapers? So first and foremost, just take a sip of water. You can get some wonderful snippets of local news. And when I start looking through a newspaper, and I do this every week, a new newspaper, I just browse through. I'm not looking for anything in particular. And you can just find the most remarkable newspaper stories when you're not even particularly looking for them. They just jump out at you. They speak to you, and that is the joy of the newspapers in our collection, because they lead you down the most remarkable of rabbit holes. I was down a massive rabbit hole yesterday, researching, as I mentioned earlier, the Civil and Military Gazette. So watch out for that one next week. But anyway, back to the Ilfracombe Chronicle. And I was just browsing through, and I found a paragraph on malicious damage that was enacted by some evil disposed person, and I quote, on Ilfracombe High Street in March 1882. So this person decided to go along the High Street with a diamond, scratching and cutting numberless sheets of plate glass, disfiguring the handsome pane at Mr. Thomas's the jeweller and the principal pane in the shop of Mrs. Twiss. I'm not sure why this person was going around damaging the streets in this way. Perhaps they had an axe to grind, or in this case, a diamond to grind. Sorry, terrible joke. But the sort of feeling from this short paragraph is you get a sense of the town, this particular street, the people who lived on it, the characters, Mr. Thomas and Mrs. Twist. It sort of sounds like an Anthony Trollope sort of Barchester Chronicles situation. And a reward of £5 was offered to catch this evil disposed person. As well as finding out about the characters of an area, you can find out about the weather. And of course, weather is a national obsession in this country. And a thunderstorm was reported in August 1882 in the Ilfracombe Chronicle, with rain and very vivid lightning, though the thunder was slight. And the article goes on to describe the sad death of a young farmer named Jackman in Tavistock. So not too near Ilfracombe, but the west of Devon, just outside of Plymouth. So this poor young farmer was at work and the rain began. So what he decided to do, he got his fork that he'd be working with, his hay fork, and got a load of hay on the end of his fork and put it above him to shelter from the rain. And sadly, the fork being metal, he was immediately struck by lightning. So a very sad end for our poor Mr. Jackman there. And if it wasn't enough, reading about your place, say your village or your town, you can find images as well in our newspaper collection. So there are, in our older newspapers, there are drawings and engravings, and some of our really old newspapers, you'd be surprised, even newspapers from the 1700s do actually contain some engravings, which I'm always a bit flabbergasted by that. But generally, from the 1840s, you have the Illustrated London News, which is one of our very special illustrated titles. And from the 1890s onwards, we get photographs being included in our newspapers. So if you're lucky, you can discover some wonderful pictures of your place. To do this, you can filter by article type. You do this by selecting article type and then choosing illustrated, and that filters all your results to those that contain images. And this was how I found this lovely picture of Ilfracombe in 1926. Now, this is from the Sphere and shows the opening of the Ilfracombe bathing season. And I just love photographs like this. Just it gives you such a sense of the time and the place, the fashions. So I'm sure the beaches have been busy today, although not a school holiday, with the lovely weather. Even though it's March, I'm sure they have been crowded. But here, the bathing season is pictured as opening in July of 1926. You can see all the deck chairs there, the wonderful swimming and bathing fashions. I love looking at historic fashions as well. So that will probably be like a whole another different video. We'll get onto that, but we'll go back to place. So something that is a really, really useful tool from our newspapers are visitors lists. And these are just, I can't say enough how wonderful these resources are. So to give you a little bit of background about visitors lists, you usually find them in newspapers from a resort town, so it's a seaside resort or perhaps a spa town, and they provide a wonderful record of the comings and goings. So they will show, for example, the people staying in that particular town for the week, and poof, they're gone the next weekend with the next visitors who've come in. And why I find them particularly useful is that it can be a useful tool for helping to locate your ancestors in between censuses. So you can see perhaps where they went on holiday, or if you are having difficulty tracking your ancestor down in a particular census, they're not where you thought they could be. They were. Perhaps a visitor list could help to show you where they were. We see a list. I've pulled this one again from the Ilfracombe Chronicle, and this gives the list of all the people visiting the town, and it's January, so it's not high season, but still there's lots of people visiting, and it gives the lists of the streets, and it gives a list of house names. So these can be a wonderful tool for researching the history of your street, and even researching the history of your house. You can see who's in your house, and this isn't a census in between censuses. So visitors lists, that's probably one of my top tips from our newspaper collections. And let's say, for example, that you are interested in the history of your street. And I pulled out a particular example here from the Ilfracombe Chronicle of Portland Street. And using the newspapers, you can really dive into the history of your street. There's just so much you can do and so much you can find out. And when we last spoke, last month, we used the name search function on our newspaper search. So that's the who option, and you can pop in first name or last name. But you don't have to use that box. So if you're searching for a thing or a place or anything else other than a name, you can use the what else box. So I've circled it there for you. So I've just typed in Portland Street. And initially, I've confined my search to the Ilfracombe Chronicle. I know that Portland Street is in Ilfracombe, so I'm probably going to find some relevant results within that newspaper. And absolutely, I've got 409 results just from that one newspaper for this street name. And you can see that it's returned some adverts for businesses on the streets. So we've got J. Andrews's General Music Warehouse at 32 Portland Street, and he would tune your pianoforte. And there's also a notice for D. Poole and Sons carriage business, where you could hire carriages and wagonettes of all kinds with experienced drivers, so aimed at the tourist industry in Ilfracombe. So with these types of adverts, you can really build up that sense of what a street was like. So kind of like when I was talking before about my maybe ill-advised trip back to 1860s Whitechapel, that can now help me imagine, if I was searching that particular street, what businesses were there, what kind of things were going on. And I don't imagine they were as genteel as the lovely pianoforte business or the carriage business that were operated on Portland Street during the 1880s. And what I would say is that you really don't have to restrict your search to one local paper. You can find out many, many wonderful things about your street or your house or your town by doing a broad search within our newspapers. So to do this, what I would recommend is using the name of your street, so Portland Street, and then put in the place Ilfracombe. Or again, if you're just looking for news about your town, just the search term Ilfracombe. And you don't have to limit your search by newspaper or county at all. The really important thing to remember when using our newspapers is that news travels. This is particularly because newspapers were syndicated, especially during the Victorian era. So stories were shared across newspapers, not even beyond geographical boundaries. And that if it's a good news story, news travels. People are going to want to read the papers. So travel from Ilfracombe in the 1930s, and there's a piece here, and that's on the top here. This is from the Aberdeen Press and Journal. So we are almost the sort of opposite end of the country, really. So Aberdeen, we've got northeast Scotland, and then we've got Ilfracombe down in the southwest. So we're going sort of, diagonally across. And this particular article describes the heroics of Mr. George Chappell from Portland Street, Ilfracombe, who jumped fully clothed into the sea at Ilfracombe to rescue Mrs. Vera Culverhouse of Pentragethan Road, Swansea. So his wonderful act of valour saving Mrs. Vera Culverhouse's life ends up in a newspaper hundreds of miles away, just showing that importance that you really don't need to limit your search geographically to find such wonderful stories. And our middle clipping here shows an advert for a comfortable bed and breakfast on Portland Street, as featured in the South Gloucestershire Gazette. So not too far away from Ilfracombe, but I picked out this example because it would have been how people would have arranged their holidays back then. So this particular advert's from the 1920s. So in an age before internet, you'd pick up your newspaper and you'd have a look and you'd see, oh yes, this sounds nice. 2 minutes from the seafront, and get in touch there with Mrs. Acourt of 31 Portland Street, Ilfracombe. But our newspapers wouldn't be complete without the rogues of the piece. We've got the hero, Mr. George Chappell, jumping into the sea at Ilfracombe, but what about our villains? And a lot of chat earlier about our diamond-wielding villain on the high street. This, definitely we need to find out more about that. Lots of suggestions coming in there for what he was up to. And this particular article at the bottom is from the 1886 Express and Echo, which details the antics of one Portland Street resident, Thomas Folland, and he was fined £1 and costs for having been drunk whilst in charge of a horse and carriage. And a second charge, thankfully, of using obscene language was withdrawn. Okay. So from place to personal now, our newspapers can also shine a light on important life events on a particular street. So the life of a street or a place can really come to life with our newspapers. So a joyous occurrence at the top there from the North Devon Journal in 1880 gives the notice of the birth of twins to the wife of Mr. Henry Abbott at 9 Portland Street, Ilfracombe, on the 2nd of October 1880. And so from life events to daily life, there's an advert from the Bridport News from nearby Dorset, which is an advertisement for a general servant in 1886. The servant must be able to cook well and wait at table. So general servant, really a maid of all work, would be required to cook, would be required to clean, long days, early mornings, late nights, and the prospective applicant is instructed here to apply to Mrs. H, 9 Portland Street, and you'll notice that it's the same address as the birth notice above. And this advertisement comes from 1886, so 6 years after the birth. Now, had the house changed hands in this time, or did it have multiple occupants? Again, this can be really useful for tracing ancestors. Newspapers can be really useful for tracing ancestors' movements through the censuses. We could find out perhaps in the 1881 census who was living at 9 Portland Street at the time. Was it Mr. Abbott? Was it Mrs. H? Was it both of them? But perhaps Mr. Abbott had moved on. Perhaps he needed more space after the birth of his twins. And I really would like to highlight how adverts for servants in newspapers give a really good sense of what a household was like. And a general servant, that's probably just going to be one. So not doesn't necessarily mean it's a huge household. But it does give you a sense of social class and standing. I can say certainly that my ancestors did not have any servants. So if you've got one good servant, I think you're doing well in life. And then sadly, you also get the death announcements as well We got a death here from Portland Street this was from the 1880s, on number 32 Portland Street, of Miss Sarah Elizabeth Broker at the age of 18. So not only do you get a sense from our newspapers of how Street was, from the businesses that operated from it, from its heroes and its villains, you get a sense of how people lived, what they celebrated, like the birth of twins, and whom they mourned, like poor Miss Sarah Elizabeth Broker, who passed away at such a young age at Portland Street. And to further shine a light on how our ancestors lived, I'm going to highlight the County Apprentices record set, which covers the years 1710 to 1808. Just to give you a little background on apprentices quickly, this was the system where an artisan or craftsman took on an apprentice to teach them the skills of their profession. Now, the Statute of Apprentices of 1564 stated that no one could set up a trade without first completing an apprenticeship, and this was law until 1814. So during an apprenticeship, the apprentice would be bound to their master for 7 years. And until 1768, you were bound to your master as an apprentice till the age of 24. In 1768, this was reduced to the age of 21. This apprenticeship bond was a legally binding one. Only justices of the peace had the power to break it. You could illegally break it by running away. It could be broken if your master died. And during this time, the apprentice would live under fairly strict conditions. They would not be allowed to marry, they weren't allowed to gamble, and they weren't allowed to go to the pub. I don't know how they survived. So when an apprenticeship was agreed on, so typically maybe the apprentice would be about 14, an indenture was signed, which is essentially a contract or written agreement between the apprentice and their master. And the parents of an apprentice might have to pay a premium for the apprenticeship. So this was generally a few pounds, but a sizable amount for the time. Now, this is where this particular record set comes about. In 1708, a stamp tax was put on indentures. So the record keeping for the apprenticeship system became much more standardized. Of course it would be. We're taxing people. We have to know how many people there are in apprenticeships in the country so we can get all the money that they can, the government. So hence this particular set from the Board of Stamps, which comprises registers of the tax paid for each indenture for an apprentice. Okay, that's the technical stuff. So what can the County Apprenticeship Record Set tell you? So it covers the whole of Great Britain, and it comprises of 1 million records, 1710 to 1808, and this has been transcribed by our wonderful partners at the Society of Genealogists. So these records will comprise of the apprentice's name, as well as their place. You get their parents' name. Now this could be one parent or it could be both parents. You get the master's name and their profession, as well as the indenture year and, if applicable, the premium amount. So why I've highlighted this particular set is I found it really useful in the past. If you're lucky enough to have traced ancestors back to the 1700s, you get to find out what job they're doing, because we have the censuses from 1841 onwards giving you a sense of what vocation your ancestors have. But it can be harder to find that information out in the 1700s. You might be, if you're lucky, it might be written down in birth, baptism, marriage, or death records, but not all the time. So I find this a really wonderful set. I think it was Kent family back in the 1700s. I found one ancestor was a carpenter. And there were all sorts of professions covered. And you can probably tell that I had a bit of a field day going through this set and looking at the many professions there were. And I can assure you that those listed here, that's just, it's definitely not exhaustive. There are many professions covered. And we've got some more unusual ones here. Peruke maker. I just love that word, peruke. So that would be the wig makers. You've got a leather seller, a watch case finisher, and then you've got more recognisable professions like your bakers. And coming under this umbrella were attorneys and lawyers, and you sort of might think they would have to go to university, but not with the apprenticeship scheme. So what I really didn't appreciate, and this is completely sort of prejudiced, I think, maybe for me, is that how apprentices could be women as well. I think I was fairly short-sighted in this, coming and looking at this set, and I was just browsing through the various records, and I was like, oh, hang on, there's an Anne, there's a Mary, what's she doing? So it's not just the blokes who are in this set too. So quite a common apprenticeship, it seems, for women in the 18th century was that of a mantua maker, or we say a dressmaker today. And I came across the wonderfully named Temperance Ballyman in this particular record set. And she was indentured as an apprentice in 1759 for a premium of £20, a considerable amount of money then. And I didn't realise this when I pulled out this record. I was already going to feature it. And then I saw that the woman who she had been indentured to was named Mary Berry. Wonderful. In Taunton in Somerset. And you can also see the information that we get from this record. You can see that it's fairly detailed from the time. So we get the name, the profession, the date, and also here we are lucky enough to get the parents' first name of our apprentice, Temperance. And you can see it's the apprentice parents' first name is Westrano. So an unusual one there. But there's no place given for Temperance. We've got her master's place, mistress's place, Mary Berry in Taunton. But where was Temperance from? Who was she? Okay, so of course I had to dive into Temperance, find out more about her. And I did a little digging. And I came across this birth entry for Temperance Westron, daughter of Thomas and Mary Ballyman, from 1745. And this is from our wonderful Devon collection of parish registers. And I just love going back to this time and looking at the handwriting. It just gives me such a buzz. So, is this our Temperance Westron? This is the important question. We can see that she's named Temperance Westron. So again, we saw in that apprenticeship record that unusual first name of Westrano from the parents. So yeah, I think we've got a bit of a link here. And the parish where her baptism is being recorded is in Ulfcombe in Devon. So Taunton's in Somerset, but this particular parish is just sort of southwest, so not too far away for Temperance to have travelled. And Taunton being county town, probably one of the bigger settlements for her to go and to learn a trade. And then again, I think this is probably the clincher, 1745, and her apprentice record is 1759. So we've got 14 years between that point. So she probably would have been 14 starting an apprenticeship. So we can definitely say, I think definitely say that this is our Temperance Ballyman. So really, apprenticeship records, it's a rich and fascinating set. If you're lucky enough to be able to trace your British ancestors back to the 18th century, these apprenticeship records are a real goldmine, giving you a sense of how society was structured and the types of businesses and careers that were available over 200 years ago. Okay, so thank you so much for joining me today and going through a journey through time and all of our new record sets of the week, as well as finding out all about apprenticeship records. So I just wish everyone a really happy Friday and a lovely and sunny weekend, and we'll be back next week with another Fridays Live. See you soon. Goodbye. Thank you.